Yeah, so fundamentally what we were talking about was the fact that RBQM adoption is on the rise, which is great. We've gone from 53% of all studies with an RBQM component in them to 88% over the last 6 years, which is a fantastic statistic. But the value, the benefits from RBQM are not being fully realized. And it was about that. What do we do about continuing to push the adoption trend up, but getting the back-end value out of RBQM as well? And that really was the main purpose of the presentation, and our insights as to what the reasons are that people aren't getting the full value yet. They're not driving the efficiency gains and the cost savings they should be. What we're doing about it as a company in order to try and change that trend. I think the obvious one is AI. I mean, every presentation I've been in, there's been some components or some discussion about AI. I don't think there's any doubts that AI is going to be one of the most important components and trends in clinical research. I think at the moment there's still a huge amount of misunderstanding as to actually what it is, how it's going to impact clinical research. I think a lot of folks at the events today I've talked to are really trying to sort of understand that better and get a sense of actually, is it something I need to be worried about today or in the future? You know, how's it going to impact me? How's it going to impact my role? So I really think, I mean, AI hands down has to be the biggest future sort of trend that I personally believe it's going to be hugely impactful, and certainly has come up over and over again at the conference today. Yeah, so I mean, what we're doing from a technology perspective is we're really trying to take a lot of the heavy lifting out of aggregating data and actually getting some sort of signal from that data. Traditionally, that's been very labor intensive, often not very effective or accurate. So our technology is very much taking all of that data, generating easy to understand signals and giving good indications as to what the sort of follow-up activities should be. So that's taking a very traditionally manual process and automating a lot of that. None of that, I think, I would call artificial intelligence. It is business intelligence, it's insights. We're just starting to touch on now, how can we add more of that sort of AI component to start a little bit more decision-making, a little bit more guidance from the data than we're currently doing right now. I think in terms of the interaction, the human-to-human interaction, and that's always going to be a core component of clinical research. What we're trying to do, I mean, the sort of coalface of clinical research, which is really the relationship between an investigator and a patient, that relationship is going to remain key. And ultimately, I think it's going to be a long time before we see any degradation in that key piece. It's a lot of the events leading up to and after that intervention where a lot of effort is being spent unnecessarily. A lot of activity that could be performed remotely is being still performed on site. And I think those are the sort of quick wins and the efficiencies that we're going after, which hopefully won't minimize the impact on a patient. That will still mean that the trials are patient-centric, but it's looking at where that human-to-human interaction is really important and removing everything else. And that's really where we're trying to go with RBQM at the moment. I mean, I think it can be used both ways. To me, it's a question of the sort of optimization of the clinical trial. And I think what I was driving at in my presentation is, ideally, companies have a strategy for how they're going to run a clinical trial or all their clinical trials, and thinking about the mix of monitoring approaches, technologies, and having a plan for that up front. The worst case scenario that I was referring to is where you're doing a bit of everything, but without really agreeing the roles of different approaches and technologies along the way. So you get a lot of noise and a lot of data, but not an awful lot of value and signal, and that makes it very difficult to find a sort of clear pathway through that clinical trial. So I would rather people are doing bits and pieces of RBQM to augment existing approaches. It's when you try and overlay the two and you're almost monitoring the study twice. That's what I call the worst case scenario, where you're doing a lot of central data-driven analytics, and then you go and do it all on site again as well because you're not confident in what you're getting from your technologies, and that's the worst case scenario. And I'd rather people either had a foot in one camp or the other, or agreed the strategy, but just doing lots of everything is the worst case scenario.